This introduction is probably the easiest one I've ever done because I asked Nathaniel Cooper to tell us a little bit about himself so that we could get to know him better. And so welcome. Appreciate you coming.
Okay, well, thank you all for having me here. I will try to stand right here. I'm pretty notorious for pacing around, but I know that
you can take it with you if you want.
No, then I'll just trip on the board. I wanted to start by thanking Ted and Dave for having me here. I also wanted to thank Wayne for the music this morning. Those of you who didn't notice, that was music from the musical Oklahoma for the talk that we're giving today. So what I'll be discussing today, hold on. My topic for today will be 10 interesting facts about Oklahoma. So just a quick bio. As I mentioned, my name is Nathaniel Cooper, but I go by Nat. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I was actually born in Stillwater, which is the town that we previously lived in before we moved to Pennsylvania. I was actually born in the hospital that I previously worked at. I attended Bristow High School and then got a bachelor's in science with a major in biology and chemistry from Northeastern State, Oklahoma, in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. After that, I was a pre-med degree. I was thinking about becoming a physician, my dad being a physician, grandfather being a physician, and then decided to go a different route and attended Trinity University, which was originally a Presbyterian college in San Antonio, and received my master's in healthcare administration. After that, I completed a residency, administrative residency at Stillwater Medical Center, which was the hospital I was born in, and then continued to work there for the next 16 years, working my way up through the ranks in administration, and ultimately, when I left, I was vice president of business development, working mainly with doctors, developing new service lines, practice management. And then when we decided to make the move to Pennsylvania, we uprooted the whole family, and I decided to change careers. I'm with a financial advisor with Thrivent Financial. I've been doing it for a little over a year. And we have an office up in Exton. I actually work with a member of the church, Phil Leshock. We're in practice together, so it's been a great transition. Some of my roots actually on both sides of my family start in Pennsylvania. So I was kind of coming home. So on the story with the family, and I'm sure this is a story with a lot of people's family, is that my ancestors on my father's side came over on the same boat as William Penn. My grandmother had the genealogy traced back before there was 23andMe and all of this stuff, and it goes back generations. And then one of the ancestors was apparently on the boat that came over with William Penn. On the other side, we didn't realize the Pennsylvania connection until we'd already moved here. One of my cousins on my maternal side was doing genealogical research and found out that my fifth great grandfather, and I have not confirmed this myself, but he apparently has done all the research, is Thomas Downing, who Downingtown is named after. I do have second cousins in Oklahoma that are Downings. And so that connection, and we actually live in Downingtown, and we found that out after we had moved here. So it was meant to be in many different ways. So with that being said, I will start my presentation. I do not claim to be a scholar in Oklahoma history. This is not even necessarily a history presentation. It's just a collection of interesting, some fun, some tragic facts that I feel a lot of people may not know about Oklahoma. I also do not have the polished presenting skills that my wife has and that you are so accustomed to, so please be gentle. So the basics. Oklahoma was the 46th state in the Union. We were granted statehood in 1907. The population of Oklahoma is just a little bit over 4 million people, which is 2 million less than in the Philadelphia Wilmington Metroplex in the entire state of Oklahoma. And of course, the capital is Oklahoma City. They were really creative with that. So one of the first facts is for the architecture buffs out there. So Oklahoma is home to the only Frank Lloyd Wright skyscraper that was ever built. He designed a few others, but the only one that was ever built is Price Tower that is located in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It was built in 1956. It was commissioned by Harold Price, who owned H.C. Price Company, which is an oil company. And the building was actually originally designed to be built in Manhattan in the 1920s, which, after the Great Depression, they stopped building skyscrapers for a little while, so it got set on the shelf. And then when Mr. Price decided he wanted a new headquarters for his company, one of his friends was an architecture professor at the University of Oklahoma, knew Frank Lloyd Wright, got them in touch. He said, "I've got the building for you." Presented it. This is actually Frank Lloyd Wright with the model of Price Tower. Frank Lloyd Wright's nickname for this building was the tree that escaped the forest, because Bartlesville is pretty flat. There are no skyscrapers. It was originally meant to be built in Manhattan, where it would have just kind of blended in with the rest of the forest. And so it escaped the forest and is out in the prairie. A few additional pictures will allow you to see. It also was inspired by trees as well. It has a 100% asymmetrical design. It looks different from every angle. Very Art Deco. It has these copper panels that kind of adorn the sides that are meant to look like leaves. And if you go to Oklahoma and decide you want to go to Bartlesville, there is a museum inside the hotel as well as an inn. So you can stay, which Leah and I have done, in the Price Tower, in this piece of art that is still available. It's interesting. The bathrooms, the fixtures, they're all original from 1956. The elevators are octagonal. It's just a very, very interesting building. So when most people think of Oklahoma, this is what they think of. They think of the plains. They think of, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. But Oklahoma is actually one of the most geographically diverse states in the country. We are one of only 4 states that have more than 10 distinct ecological regions, and the most regions per square mile. Those regions include the Western High Plains, I'm not sure which one, Southeast Tablelands, the Great Central Plains, which is most people know about, Tallgrass Prairie, Cross Timbers, East Central Texas Plains, Caves and Prairie, Ozark Highlands, Ozark Forest, the Hardwood Forest, the Ouachita Mountains, spelled with an O, and cypress swamps and forests. We actually had in our ICU at the old hospital, we had pictures from all different regions of Oklahoma. And anytime I would bring a physician in and tour, I would have them ask, "Where do you think this is?" "No, that's in Oklahoma." "Where do you think this is?" "No, that's in Oklahoma." So a few of the interesting pictures. So this is, no, it's not the ocean, it's not the sky. Those are the Great Salt Plains in Oklahoma. So that is salt on the surface. Apparently I found out that they go and race supercars out there just because it's flat and you can see the salt shooting up whenever they're driving around really fast. But you can also go and dig for salt crystals. So it's a very interesting place. These are the mesas. The highest point in Oklahoma is Black Mesa in the Panhandle. And so very different topography when you go out there, because they're just these huge, looks like the top's cut off of them, just flat mesas. That's Turner Falls in the southern part of the state. We do have, those are the Elk Mountains in the south eastern part of the state. We also have the Ouachita Mountains in the southwestern part of the state. Many rivers. That's the Illinois River. There's actually trout fishing even in Oklahoma. You wouldn't think that far in the south there would be. We have the cypress swamps, as we mentioned, and then these are the Ouachita Mountain Narrows, which are canyons that look, like almost like a little mini Grand Canyon. So just find that fascinating that most people think of. And I know there's some native Kansas people in the audience. So anytime people say, "Well, Oklahoma's just plains," I say, "No, that's Kansas." So most people know that Oklahoma has a rich Native American history. Being the end of the Trail of Tears was in Oklahoma. Oklahoma actually has the second largest Native American population, second only to California, and actually has the second highest population per capita, second only to Alaska, with 13% of the Oklahoma population being Native Americans. But we do have the most Native languages spoken. Sorry, just trying to. My email is interrupting. I know you guys are getting a preview. All right. There are 25 Native American languages that are spoken in Oklahoma. Cherokee is by far the most prominent, and some of these languages are only spoken by a couple individuals that are trying to keep the language alive. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through the entire list. You can Google it and get the entire list on there. But it is, it's a great, interesting, somewhat tragic part of the Oklahoma history. But it's something that they're very proud of, want to keep it alive, and so forth. We actually just opened in Oklahoma. It's the first Americans Museum of Oklahoma, so another destination that if you decide to visit, I would highly recommend going to as well. Staying in the theme of Native American history, I know that I didn't want to go into the Osage and kind of what happened, because a lot of people are aware of that now, that the Killer of the Flower Moon book and movie have both come out. But there's a very tragic history if you have not read or seen those movies. If you do go see the movie, be warned, it's like 3 hours and 45 minutes. But I have not actually seen it yet, but I've heard it's very good. It's tough to watch. But the history of the Osage tribe, when they settled on the land that was granted to them, they kept the mineral rights for that land and struck oil. And so they were very, very, very wealthy. At one point, I believe the second largest Rolls Royce dealership in the country was in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, because that's what they all wanted to drive, were Rolls Royce. And the Killers of the Flower Moon goes into the story around some of the Native American women who were taken advantage of and wealth stolen. But again, I won't go into that in great detail. But it's also where the FBI pretty much got its start. Was because of this situation. But something that is also very interesting about this area in the Osage is there is a strong Christian connection in that area. And around the 1820s, the first Protestant missionaries made their way into the Oklahoma and Kansas territory, and were bringing Christianity to Native Americans. And then in 1846, Father Schoenmaker, who was a Jesuit, moved to Kansas and then actually into Oklahoma Territory and started a really close relationship with the Osage tribe. And so during that, there's actually even a connection to Pennsylvania through all of that teaching as well. In, I believe, 1887, Mother Mary Catherine Drexel started a school for Native American girls in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And so there's a lot of connections between Pennsylvania and Oklahoma that I found out during this research. But during all of this, they decided there was a Catholic congregation that was started in 1887, and then in 1915 they decided to build a Catholic church. It is the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. That name might sound familiar to some of you. That's also where Ree Drummond, who is a pioneer woman, has her store, is in Pawhuska. But if you do end up making the journey, I would highly recommend going and visiting the church. It's known as the Cathedral of the Osage. As I mentioned, it was built in 1915 and has a very unique set of stained glass windows. It is not permissible for living people to be depicted in stained glass windows through the Catholic rules and so forth of what govern what can be put in those windows. And I actually learned a little bit more even to myself. I thought it was because you couldn't be in the Holy Family, but it actually has to do with if people living can't be depicted in the windows. And so there had to be a special dispensation from the Vatican directly from the Pope to allow these windows to be placed because two of these individuals were living Native American chiefs at the time. And so they had to get special dispensation. The windows are from Munich, Germany, and were brought over in 1920, even though it was built in 1915 because of the war. They couldn't bring the windows over, but they are absolutely priceless, irreplaceable, and absolutely beautiful windows. So this is an interesting fact that I did not know until I started doing this research. This is just kind of a random one, that Oklahoma is the only state in the country that produces iodine. And it's actually globally, only Chile and Japan produce more iodine than the state of Oklahoma. Where that comes from is there are actually, it's found in the Anadarko Valley, and it is found in Lower Pennsylvanian Moro sands, which is what they're called. It's a layer of sand that's about, I think, 7,000 to between 7,000 and 13,000 feet below the surface. And when they're bringing up, a lot of it is a byproduct of oil production. When they're bringing up water and so forth, the minerals come up, and production didn't start until around, I think, 1977. And even though Chile and Japan do produce more iodine, the area in Oklahoma actually has the highest parts per million concentration of the mineral in the entire world. The next one is I'll start with prefacing, Oklahoma is known as Tornado Alley. More tornadoes anywhere happen in Oklahoma. A lot of them happen not in populated areas, but it's tragic when they do hit in those areas. And the fastest wind speed ever recorded on Earth was recorded in Oklahoma in 1999 in the Moore Bridge Creek, the Bridge Creek Moore tornado. It was a category F5. At one point, the tornado had a diameter of a mile. The winds were recorded. Technically, they're not officially recorded because there are no instruments that can withstand the violent force inside the tornado, but the Doppler tools, which have been developed in Oklahoma through the Meteorological College there, have developed ways to be able to measure those winds even without direct instruments in there. And so the estimates are between 300 and 320 miles an hour in this storm. Sadly, that tornado resulted in 23 fatalities and over $1 billion of damage done through the town of Moore. It's interesting whenever you look at the tornadoes and how they come about and so forth, and they tend to follow very similar paths. Where this tornado hit in Moore, there have been 4 other major tornadoes that have hit right on that same path. Unfortunately, per insurance laws, those people, if they want to be able to get their insurance and rebuild the house, it needs to be rebuilt there. And so I know I have friends that have rebuilt their house 3 or 4 times on the same slab. And it's interesting. People, especially when I was recruiting positions to Oklahoma, they would ask me, "How many tornadoes have you seen? When did they happen?" I was a resident of Oklahoma for over 40 years, and I never saw a tornado. So they hit in specific areas. Some areas that don't have them. Stillwater, where we previously lived, the last tornado they had was in 1981. And it was kind of on the outskirts of town. So there are very specific areas with a high concentration of tornadoes. Although that's not to say that I haven't been in very many shelters and our safe room, and because you never know when it is going to divert off its path. So this is a little bit of a fun one. So what is a Sooner? So, we are known as a Sooner State, and OU, who I am not a fan of, I'm an Oklahoma State fan, so hence why the slide is in here. They are known as the Oklahoma Sooners. And what a Sooner is, it's a term that was coined during the land runs, which which started in 1889, whenever President Benjamin Harrison basically granted what was then Native American land to white settlers to come in and claim what were 160-acre parcels of land. And the way they were set up is there was a time, they started at noon, and here's the line, everybody's on that line. And what I found out was mainly engineers and surveyors who would go out, they would survey the land, they'd find what they liked, and then they would hide. And whenever about an hour before everybody else got there, they would jump up and claim their stake. That it was a lot. It started to become so prominent that in the middle of the land runs, because there were several land runs that happened during this time. Finally, the government stepped in and said, "No, we will. People can contest the claims," and so they tried to shut it down. But what I like to say in jest, because I am not an Oklahoma Sooner fan, is that in a sense, a Sooner is a cheater. Any OU fans in the crowd? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I have to get a little jab in there every year, especially since they left the Big 12 conference. But so these are interesting. These next two are interesting facts that I did not know until I started doing this research as well. So there are a few scouting firsts in Oklahoma. So the first Girl Scout cookies sold in the United States were sold in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was the Mistletoe Troop, and they decided to raise money for their troop. So they baked cookies. I don't think they were making Thin Mints or, the new Adventurefuls or any of that. But so they baked cookies, took them to their high school, and sold them. And that was the first time that proceeds from a cookie sale were used to support a Girl Scout troop. In the 1920s, it started to, there was a recipe that was sent out nationwide to the rest of the troops, and they started selling them, and they were home-baked cookies as well. And then we all kind of know where it happened from them, where it went from them. I think they probably got a little more of the proceeds from those sales. Yeah. Another scouting first, and I will not say the first, I will say one of the first Boy Scout troops in America was in, again, Pawhuska, Oklahoma. There were a couple other troops that kind of go back and forth of claiming the first troop. One actually in Bala Cynwyd. Bala 1 was organized in 1908. There's a troop in Vermont that was organized in the summer of 1909, and the troop in Pawhuska, Oklahoma was organized in May of 1909. Yes.
Many of you may not know that this church was the home of the first Boy Scout troop in Chester County, and may have been the first Boy Scout troop in the whole country. It was troop number 1, and Reverend Williams, was it Williams or Williams? Williams had read an article about this scouting group in England in the first few years of 1900 that really fascinated him, and so he got some of the fathers together from Westminster Church to start their own scouting troop here at this church. And in 1918, when the Chester County Council was first chartered, they renumbered the troops and gave Troop 1 the number of Troop 6, which still exists today. And of course, everybody here was very upset about it. But so this church has a long history of scouting, and there's a Scout Troop 93 that meets in this room every Thursday.
There's the Presbyterian Church in Stillwater had a long history as well, and the troop that was there, that actually was a troop my father was a part of, didn't start this early, but it was one of the earlier troops. I know that they've been around for over 100 years in continuous operation as well. But where the Scout troop in Pawhuska started is it started from the English troop. The Boy Scouts in England were started from Lord Baden-Powell, and the Reverend John F. Mitchell actually had worked with Lord Powell in England, and then came over to Indian Territory, or actually the state of Oklahoma at the time. It was new in statehood, and started a scouting group. It was actually chartered underneath an English charter, and this is actually a picture of the troop, and they were all in English uniforms, English badges, and so forth. And the Boy Scouts of America, I believe, was started a year later. And so it was not a troop of the Boy Scouts of America. It was a troop under the Boy Scouts of England. So very, very interesting history when it comes to that. But it is contested. There are 3 or 4 troops that claim to be the first troop, and there are plaques. There's actually a ceremony in Oklahoma that, you know, was, we are the first Boy Scout troop, and then there's one in Vermont that, so there's about 3 or 4 plaques across the country claiming to be the first. So I changed the title from first Boy Scout troop to one of the first, just since it's highly contested. So I'll take a little bit of a sombering turn. I want to talk a little bit about one of the worst acts of racial violence against African Americans that has ever happened in this country. Happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is it is an interesting fact, but a very sad and very tragic fact. I'm going to start talking just a little bit of history about Africa. I need to go back one. Well, my slides got out of order. Sorry. That's supposed to be ahead of that one. So just a little bit of history. And I wasn't aware of this until several years ago, but the tribes in Oklahoma actually brought with them on the Trail of Tears African American slaves, and have had slaves up to roughly around 4,000 by the time of the end of the Civil War and the passing of the 13th Amendment. The slaves in Oklahoma were not actually freed until 1866, which is 1 year after the 13th Amendment, when a new treaty was signed between the American government and the tribes to allow for the slaves to be free. And so what happened is most of those slaves, when they decided to stay in what was then Oklahoma Territory, banded together and formed all black towns. And at one point, the highest concentration of all black towns in the United States was in Oklahoma. There were roughly around 50 towns that were developed. There are still 15 of those today that are still in existence. Those communities worked together and thrived and were prosperous and grew. And so they grew, and there was an area even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was not one of those towns, that grew into a very, very wealthy, one of the wealthiest African American areas in the state of Oklahoma, I mean in the country. And then in 1921, that all changed. And some of you may know about this, some of you may not. It's been something that has been a little more publicized lately, but in May of 1921, there was an incident where an African-American gentleman was accused of assaulting a white woman and was put in jail. A lynch mob came to try to, get what they claimed as their justice. He was protected by another group of African-American men, and an argument ensued, which ended up in what has been, which is one of the worst acts of racial violence against African Americans in this country. So during those 2 days, there were 35 blocks that were burned to the ground. There were Molotov cocktails dropped from the air. Estimates of over 300 people died, and then nobody really talked about it for about 80 years. They found a mass grave in Tulsa. Even though a lot of them rebuilt, no insurance adjusters, no claims were paid, none of that. Most of that wealth was never recovered. And it's just a very sad chapter in Oklahoma history. A lot of those prominent figures left Oklahoma during this time, and then that area ended up becoming fairly rundown and so forth. After that time, it was at one point also known as Black Wall Street in that area. There's been several different shows that have incorporated that. I believe they even talked about it in the movie Killers of the Flower Moon. There was an HBO show called Watchmen that was centered around kind of that time, and so it has, became more prominent in the knowledge of this country. But I took 10 plus years of Oklahoma history. And it was not mentioned once. It was not discussed, which is very sad. And there are a lot of incidents around this country that has happened as well. But it's just something that's very sad. I'm not going to end on a sad note, and so the last thing I want to talk about is the largest private gift to a community park in U.S. history was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and some of this ties directly with the Greenwood massacre. This is a park called the Gathering Place. It is a park designed for all residents of Tulsa. It is on the Tulsa waterfront. It is very close to a very prominent part of Tulsa. One of the things that the Kaiser Foundation required whenever they built this and gave the donation was that it needed to be accessible to everyone, which caused some trepidation in certain areas. But it is walkable, rideable from most areas of Tulsa, including the north side of Tulsa, which is predominantly African American. It is a fantastic community center. It was opened in September of 2018. It's 100 acres large, and it actually has helped Tulsa to be put on the list of the Forbes most must-visit places in the Midwest, which is actually a little bit contested when you're in Oklahoma too. Of what region are we in? Are we in the Midwest? Are we in the South? Are we in the Southwest? Depends on who you talk to where we are. But according to Forbes, we're in the Midwest. And so it is classified as one of the top places to visit in the Midwest. And a lot of it is because of the Gathering Place, which if you get a chance to go to Tulsa, to go to Oklahoma, I would highly recommend visiting this area. So with that, that's like I said, this was not meant to be a comprehensive Oklahoma history lesson. It was just the things that I found interesting about Oklahoma.
I was just going to say, back in my day anyway, Oklahoma was well known for collegiate wrestling, both Oklahoma State and Oklahoma.
I have some family ties to that. My grandfather moved to Oklahoma in 1960 and was the team physician for Oklahoma State for about 40 years. So took care of Jalen Smith, took care of Kenny Monday, all the wrestlers in that area. So yes, it's still a wrestling powerhouse. But.
And the other thing is there's supposed to be a great cowboy museum in Oklahoma City or somewhere.
There's the Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, which is a great museum. There's several interesting museums. The Filbert Museum is it's kind of similar in the vein of Winterthur, where it was a home that was built by the Phillips family, Phillips Oil family, and then donated to the city, and it's a fantastic art museum. There's another museum in Bartlesville, kind of where Christ Towers is, which was another member of the Phillips family that, again, donated to Oklahoma, where it's got a fantastic Native American museum, as well as free roaming buffalo and so forth. So, yes.
I can support your feelings about Sooners. From a personal standpoint, my great-great-grandfather was one of the ones that was in the land rush, and he had lived in the area, and he went out and found some acreage where he wanted to try to get. And so when the land rush started, he went right to that area. He got there and there was somebody already there. And he knew no one had beat him during the race, that the guy had gotten there sooner. And but what he did, I don't know how it happened, but he had a watch and he traded his watch for the land. So he got his land by giving up his watch.
Wow, it's probably a pretty good trade.
Yeah, Chuck.
We all miss something from our past. I grew up in Hershey. I miss the smell of chocolate.
Yeah.
What's the biggest thing you miss since you left Oklahoma?
Oh, I mean, family is the obvious answer, but that's pretty much a given. What I miss the most? It's not the heat. It's not the tornadoes. I'm a big foodie, so there's some restaurants that I love to frequent there that I probably miss. There's some fantastic Mexican food, which we found several places around here that are excellent as well. But there's just a couple of my staple restaurants that I probably miss the most.
Thank you.
I know, was that the right answer, Leah? What was I supposed to say?
Sure.
Yeah, Sherry?
So I grew up 2 miles from Oklahoma, and my husband was gonna ask basically the same question, so I usurped him, but,
She's in charge.
he didn't grow up there. My dad worked in Oklahoma. We swore that, like, as soon as we went across the state line, people had an accent. So do you notice, like, you don't have that Oklahoma accent, so maybe it was just that part of the country near Miami, Oklahoma. But do you notice an accent here generally?
Not, well, it depends, it depends on where people are from. Even in this area, there are some pretty pronounced accents, but not really. And I can tell that she is really from that area because she said Miami, right?
Yes, yes. not
Because you know
Miami.
somebody's not from that area if they say Miami, Oklahoma. Because it's spelled that way, but it is Miami.
How do you say water?
Water. Yes. I will say, when Leah and I had been married for about a year, I got on, I had a phone call with one of my friends who is a redneck, if you would. And she looked over because it's one of those things you revert sometimes to things in your childhood. And when speaking with my friend Ty, I just reverted back to my Oklahoma accent, and she looks over and said, "Who are you talking to?" So it can come out if it needs to, and I still believe that y'all is a great word. It's a combination. It works well. It's so much more efficient.
So I had a question and a
Yes.
comment. So, my understanding was that, there was a young, black guy, a black young man and a white woman that were in an elevator. Is that my understanding?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
how it all started?
He was 19, I believe she was 17, and he was, she accused him of assaulting her, and that's how the whole massacre started.
Okay. And then I had a question about, Indian, there's multiple Indian territories, right?
Mhm.
And how does that exist with counties within Oklahoma? How does that work?
Well, this is a highly touchy subject right now because the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that the treaties were never dissolved, and that actually about 2/3 of Oklahoma is still considered Native American land. Current governor of Oklahoma does not want to work with the tribes, is very adamant about not working with the tribes. And so it's become a very complicated situation. The land does kind of spread out to different counties and so forth. Where it really becomes complicated is whenever you get into the legal system. Historically, non-natives who commit crimes on native land can only be prosecuted by the federal government, not the state government, which means anything other than capital crimes go unpunished. Whenever this ruling came out that all of this land was still native land, there were so many cases that came back and said, "Oh, well, I couldn't be tried in Oklahoma because I was," and so the Supreme Court actually came back and gave an opinion saying, no, that's not the case as far as jurisdiction around laws in those areas are still, the state has sovereignty in some of that. But there's a lot of tragic things in many of the states that have large Native American populations and reservations and so forth about violence against Native population that goes unprosecuted because of the laws and the federal government have to be I read a statistics, and I don't know if it's still the case, but the only classification of individuals who is not tracked from a missing person standpoint are Native American women, because so many of them disappear.
And what is your understanding now? Pardon me. The scale of Pennsylvania is quite large, but Kansas and Oklahoma they're bigger than Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania
I
by a
believe-
wide margin. Is that right?
I believe so. You know, we went down to Ocean City, Maryland last summer, and we just were baffled by in 3 hours we went through 3 states. You know, in Oklahoma, especially because we were in the central part of Oklahoma, we had to drive 4 hours to even get to one state. And so, yes, it's very large, and especially if you look at driving across across Oklahoma, if you go from the Panhandle to the southwest corner, it is a good probably 14, 15-hour drive across the state. So, yeah, it's very large. Yes.
Yeah, is there still a great amount of fracking in Oklahoma in the sort of earthquake? Because it would, I mean, at one time we were hearing it's like the most earthquake prone, like small, but
They were small. Some were up in the 4s and 5s. But yes, so it wasn't actually the fracking that caused the earthquakes. It was the wastewater that was being pumped back in to the wells to replace the oil and gas that was taken out that caused that. There is still fracking. I don't think it's on the scale that it was back whenever all of the earthquakes were happening. But yes, it was an interesting time whenever all of a sudden we went from having 1 or 2 earthquakes a year to 500, 600 a year. And the only thing that had changed is that we started a new method of taking oil out of the ground. And there was a lot of controversy around that, especially whenever insurance companies were denying claims because they said it was made by the oil companies saying no, that it didn't. And I think ultimately it was determined that yes, it was the fracking that was causing the earthquakes. I don't think it's there's not as many earthquakes, but doesn't mean that they're not still fracking.
Future reference, Okie from Muskogee. Maybe you could find something about that.
I I lived in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and I worked in Muskogee as a waiter and in a clothing store. So I can technically say I'm an Okie from Muskogee.
Dave.
Is Will Rogers the most famous Oklahoman, or Jim Thorpe? I think was from Oklahoma.
Jim Thorpe was born in Yale, Oklahoma. His home is still standing. And that was a town that we went through every time we went back to my parents' home. Will Rogers is up there as well. It's actually an interesting fact. There are 2 airports in Oklahoma. One is the Will Rogers International Airport, Will Rogers World Airport, and there's a Wiley Post Airport. Both of who died in a plane crash together. Yeah, probably Will Rogers, I would say, is probably, Barry Sanders maybe up there as well. He was actually from Wichita, but went to school at Oklahoma State. Who else did you think, Leah?
probably, or Carrie Underwood.
Carrie Underwood, oh yeah. If you're in New York and you're into theater, Christopher Chenoweth as well is from Oklahoma.
Or Garth.
Oh yeah, can't forget about Garth.
Let's stick with Will Rogers.
Yeah, we'll stick with Will Rogers.
Gene Autry.
Gene Autry, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
All right.